When the co-ops came in and gave arbitrarily low amounts that were not business possible, and that's been proven now by more than half of them already failing and the rest of them struggling, they put out a pricing strategy. Other companies in the area, other insurance companies in the area, had to try to compete with those co-ops that had these arbitrarily low costs on it that were clearly not sustainable, which forced them down, which I believe some of those insurance companies have now left those markets. We have many states that have fewer insurance options now, not only the co-op leaving, but other companies leaving as well. Do we know a connection here, or is it too early to know whether the co-ops in those markets were driving prices low, forcing other companies to have to try to compete with them, and then now they have since left the market as well, giving even fewer options to the consumer?
That's an issue that really needs to be subject to high-quality investigation and research. Clearly, in principle, low prices can have a negative effect on the market overall when they're written really well below what the consensus estimate of costs is. And I think we'll find out more over time as people start to dig into this. I would add that, of course, there was a lot of variation in 2014 among the 23 co-ops. Some had relatively high prices. They sold very little business. So in those cases, any negative spillovers from pricing weren't there. But in a few cases where we had these enormous explosive growth during 2014, I think it's at least plausible that there were adverse effects in terms of pricing in the overall market that could have contributed to poor results in the overall market. But one thing we know for sure is that when you have a new entrant with no experience that comes in with a very low price, someone should be paying very close attention to their early enrollment and getting whatever data they can about early claims and really asking the hard question of when is enough is enough? Shouldn't we be putting some sort of speed limit or brake on this enrollment so that they can't run up an enormous tab that they won't be able to pay?
CMS has testified that only 16% of the applicants actually got the loan, which gives the impression, we were very limiting, 84% returned away, so we really were getting the cream of the crop. Obviously, the cream of the crop, more than half of them are now out of business. So my question is, of the business models that were presented, could they have gotten private funding, or are these individuals presenting a business model that only government would have actually provided a loan for them?
That's an important question. The business models that I reviewed, I think it would have been really, really difficult to make a sell to any private investors with those models. What private investors would be looking for is, do you have something here that we really think is disruptive and beneficial that will allow you to have a better model going forward? And I think it's highly unlikely they would have seen that. Now, I hasten to add that some significant private money has gone into health insurance startups, and some of them have reported pretty large losses for 2014 and 2015. So private investment doesn't have a monopoly here on any kind of wisdom.
Correct, but private investment is also tracking the day-to-day operations, trying to figure out, are you going to make it or you're not going to make it? Are we going to keep dumping money into this? Or are we going to force you to make some changes internally to actually be successful?
Yes, and private investment in these sort of situations, the money will be paid out over time based on clear evidence that the performance is being met. And if there are warning signs that things are problematic, the spigot gets shut off.
Rather than changing the rules and saying, okay, you can now use this money and count it as capital and count it as assets, and the rules change through the middle of it. They're not going to do that in a private setting.
No.
No. Let me ask another question that's a quick one as well. The Class Act was a long-term care insurance program that was created by Obamacare. At the very beginning, it was studied to be implemented. It was in the law. Do it. Secretary Sebelius came out and said this is totally unsustainable at the very beginning and said if we try to implement this, it cannot be done under this current model. Congress agreed, 2013, pulled out the funding for that. That program went away. They saw immediately that the long-term care insurance that was put into place is not sustainable, studied it, and pulled it. The co-ops, they aggressively went after, started it, and put over, $2 billion into something that we're now discovering is just as totally unsustainable. What's different about the Class Act and their research behind the scenes or the co-ops?
I think one thing that's different, as I recall, is that with the Class Act, you had various independent government agencies doing the actuarial projections and forecasts with an eye towards budget implications from the beginning. and recognizing that the program had to be financially sustainable in order to go forward. In the co-op's case, there may have been much more uncertainty in the short run about what was likely to happen, and the co-op business plans were accompanied by actuarial feasibility studies by major actuarial firms and advisors that were putting out scenarios that suggested that they might be viable.